I never thought a cracked wooden door and a shattered ego would be the start of a full-blown war with the Oak Ridge Estates, HOA. But here I was, standing in my entryway, staring at glass shards, splintered trim, and the smug back of Karen Ellingsworth, head of the HOA and self-appointed queen of the cul-de-sac, storming off like she hadn't just committed a felony. It all started with a sign. 3 days ago, I put up a basic, hand-painted stake sign in my front yard. It read, "Veterans deserve better, support local reform." I'm a retired Marine, and I'd been helping push a city council initiative to stop the HOA from hiking up monthly fees without transparency. The sign wasn't big, wasn't flashy. It just said what needed to be said. Apparently, Karen didn't agree. She showed up at my place the next morning, arms folded, hair teased into some kind of helmet, looking like she just walked off the set of a reality show titled Desperate Dictators of Suburbia. "That sign violates Article 12, Section 4, she barked, eyes squinting like I'd insulted her personally. "No unapproved signage is permitted on lawns." I leaned against the porch rail and crossed my arms. "It's a personal expression, not commercial." "And we're not a mandatory HOA," Karen's nostrils flared. "Oak Ridge Estates is an organized community with standards." I shrugged. "Then get a court order." She stormed off. I figured that was the end of it. It wasn't. 2 nights later, I came home from my shift at the mechanic shop greasy, tired, and craving leftover chili when I noticed something off. My porch light was out. My door was open. I stepped inside and stopped dead, the sign, smashed into pieces. My front door. Split down the middle like someone had used a crowbar. And my ring cam, torn off and tossed into a bush. I backed out, grabbed my phone, and called the cops. The officer who showed up, Officer Delgado, took one look at the damage and let out a low whistle. "She really wanted to make a point, huh?" He said, "You're saying it was her without asking." Delgado scratched the back of his neck. "Well, we've had complaints about her before. Nothing stuck. People are scared of retaliation." "You think I'm scared of her?" He raised an eyebrow. "No. I think she's about to find out she messed with the wrong guy." Turned out, my backup security cam hidden by my garage light captured the whole thing. Karen Ellingsworth, in her trademark pastel blazer and wedge heels, stomping up to my porch just after sunset, yanking out the camera, then going full psycho with a tire iron. I sent Delgado the footage. He whistled again. "You pressing charges?" "Absolutely." I filed charges the next morning: property damage, trespassing, and destruction of personal property. But I wasn't stopping there. See, I'd been quietly collecting dirt on Oak Ridge's HOA for months. Ever since they tried to fine me $1,200 for repainting my fence a slightly different shade of beige. Turned out, they weren't even legally recognized as a mandatory HOA. They were operating in a gray zone, no recorded covenants, no proper bylaws filed with the county, and no actual authority to enforce fines. They'd been bluffing for years, banking on neighbors being too intimidated to push back. And now Karen had handed me the perfect excuse to go nuclear. I took a few personal days from the shop, rolled up my sleeves, and got to work. First, I filed a civil suit against Karen personally, not just for the damage, but for emotional distress. Then I contacted my old friend, Emmeline Marsh, who worked in the city's zoning department. "You're finally doing it?" she asked when I walked into her office with a folder an inch thick. "Yep," I said. "Time to shut the circus down." Emmeline flipped through my documentation: fake fines, unapproved meeting minutes, and most damning of all, a forged signature on a recent voting quorum that Karen had used to raise dues across the board. "This is fraud," she muttered. "Real fraud." "I know," she leaned back in her chair. "I can get this to the city attorney, but this'll go public." "Good." Within 48 hours, the city attorney's office launched an investigation. Karen had no clue it was coming. She was too busy printing out violation notices for my neighbors, trying to pressure them into siding with her. But the tide was turning. Fast. The morning after the investigation went public, Karen was out front again, red-faced and yelling at a neighbor named Devin for putting up a "Support Quinton" sign on his lawn. "You're all violating community standards," she shrieked. "Then call the cops," Devin shot back. "Oh wait, you're not a real HOA, are you?" Her face froze. I watched from my porch, arms folded, heart pounding. This was just the beginning. The lawsuit was moving forward, the city was digging deep, and I wasn't backing down. Karen had smashed my door. I was about to smash her entire fake empire. And unlike her, I had the law on my side. By the end of that week, Oak Ridge Estates was no longer a neighborhood, it was a battlefield. The police investigation into Karen's break-in was already generating buzz, but it wasn't until the city started sending formal notices to the HOA board that the real unraveling began. And it wasn't just Karen they came for. I was sitting on my porch with a mug of black coffee when a white city vehicle rolled up and parked in front of the Ellingsworths. A man in a navy windbreaker stepped out, clipboard in hand, and walked straight to the door. Karen's husband, Roger, answered. He looked like he wanted to melt into the bricks when the man handed over a thick envelope. A minute later, Roger came outside, scanning the street like he was checking for snipers. He spotted me and his face tightened. "You proud of yourself?" he called out. I took a slow sip. Not yet. But I'm getting there. By that afternoon, the city had put an administrative freeze on all dues collection and violation fees issued by the HOA. That meant Karen and her cronies couldn't legally demand a dime from anyone until the investigation concluded. The HOA's bank account, which, according to the city's audit notice, hadn't been properly disclosed in over 2 years, was flagged for a forensic audit. That's when the real fireworks started. Turns out, Karen's treasurer, a guy named Martin Webb, had been reimbursing himself for operating costs. Problem was, those costs included a weekend spa retreat, a set of patio furniture delivered to his daughter's condo in Phoenix, and a $2,000 consulting fee to a company that didn't exist. I didn't need to lift a finger on that one. The city attorney's office requested subpoenas based on the documents I'd already handed over, and the paper trail lit up like a Christmas tree. But I wasn't done. At the next emergency board, meeting the first one held in a public venue, since the HOA could no longer use the clubhouse without a permit, I showed up early and took a seat right in the front row. The room was packed. Folding chairs creaked under the weight of years of frustration. People who'd never spoken up before were there, some holding folders, others with phones out, ready to record. Karen walked in 5 minutes late, wearing a navy pantsuit that looked like it hadn't seen daylight since the Bush administration. She scanned the room and visibly recoiled when she saw me. She cleared her throat. "Let's get through this quickly. We're under review, not indictment." From the back, someone called out, "Yet." Karen's eye twitched, but she pressed on. "We'll be resuming enforcement as soon as the city concludes their audit. In the meantime, you're suspended," I said. "You can't issue directives." "I'm the acting president." "No, you're not," Emmeline announced as she stepped through the door with a representative from the city attorney's office. "You were never properly elected. In fact, there hasn't been a legal election in over 5 years." The room went dead silent. Karen's mouth flapped open like a fish pulled from a tank. Emmeline laid a stack of papers on the table in front of her. "These are notices of administrative suspension. You and the rest of the board are prohibited from acting in any HOA capacity until further notice. Any attempt to do so will be treated as impersonation of a public officer. That's a crime." Karen's voice cracked. "This is a personal attack. He's orchestrating this." I raised a brow. "No, that was you when you kicked in my door with a tire iron," people snickered. Even Martin Webb, who had been sweating bullets in the corner, gave a short, bitter laugh, and then came the real bombshell. The city rep stepped forward. "We've also received credible information that the HOA has been collecting dues under false pretenses. The subdivision's original covenants expired 7 years ago and were never renewed in accordance with state law. Without those covenants, there is no legal authority to act as a homeowners association." Karen staggered back like she'd been slapped. "That's ridiculous. We've been operating for decades." "Illegally," the rep said. "You've been collecting money you weren't entitled to." "That's civil fraud." The room exploded. People shouted over each other. Some demanded refunds. Others wanted to know why they'd been threatened with liens. One woman waved a folder full of letters she'd received threatening foreclosure over a cracked window pane. Karen tried to speak, but the noise drowned her out. She finally grabbed her purse and stormed out, dragging Roger behind her like a reluctant toddler leaving a toy store. Once they were gone, Emmeline addressed the crowd. Here's what happens next. The city will be appointing an independent facilitator to evaluate whether this community wants to re-establish an HOA legally and voluntarily. In the meantime, all enforcement actions are null and void. If you've paid dues in the last 18 months, you may be eligible for reimbursement. The applause nearly shook the walls, but the story didn't end there. A week later, Karen was arrested. I was in the garage tuning up a 1972 Chevelle when I heard the sirens. Two cruisers pulled up to the Ellingsworth's house, and a team of officers walked her out in handcuffs. The local news van was already there. Someone had tipped them off. The coverage that night was brutal. They showed footage of her being led away, her face blotchy and stunned, while the anchor read off a list of charges: vandalism, criminal trespass, fraud, and unlawful collection of funds. Her bail was set at $25,000. Roger posted it, but she wasn't allowed to leave the county pending trial. Meanwhile, I filed a motion to dissolve what was left of the HOA entirely. With the covenants expired, the board removed, and the members scattered, there wasn't much left to fight, but I wanted it official. I wanted a judge's signature on a dissolution so ironclad that no one could ever come back and try to resurrect it with a fancy letterhead and fake fines. 3 weeks later, after a brief hearing, the judge ruled in my favor. Oak Ridge Estates HOA was dissolved. Permanently. The sign I'd put up, the one that started all of this, went back in the ground. Only this time I added a second one underneath it. This neighborhood is officially free. People started dropping by to thank me, not just for standing up to Karen, but for proving it could be done. That when you document everything, know the law, and refuse to back down, even the loudest bully eventually runs out of room. Devin brought over a 6-pack and told me he was organizing a neighborhood block party, the first one in years, without an HOA checklist and clipboard inspections. Others started tearing out the overpriced approved shrubs and replacing them with native plants. One guy even painted his house bright teal just because he could. It wasn't perfect. Some people still grumbled. But for the first time in a long time, Oak Ridge felt like a community again, not a kingdom patrolled by self-appointed monarchs. As for Karen, her trial was set for the fall. Her lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the DA wasn't interested. Too many people had been hurt. Too many lies had been told, and me. I was finally able to sit on my porch, coffee in one hand, dog at my feet, knowing I'd taken back what was mine, not just my door, but the whole damn neighborhood. 2 months after the dissolution of the Oak Ridge Estates HOA, the neighborhood looked different. Not in a flashy, overnight way, but in the quiet, steady way that real change settles in. Lawns were a little more colorful. People waved more. No anonymous compliance reminders showed up in mailboxes. It was almost easy to forget the chaos that had led to this peace. Almost. Karen's trial was inching closer, and I was set to testify. But what we didn't know yet, what none of us could have imagined, was how deep her rabbit hole went. It started with a call from an accountant named Thomas Avery. I didn't know him, but he'd gotten my number from Emmeline. He was the city's forensic auditor assigned to the HOA case. His voice was clipped, professional, and urgent. "I'm hoping you can meet me at the clerk's archive downtown," he said. "There's something you might want to see." I met him the next morning, tucked between shelves of old community filings and dusty deeds. He had a laptop open on the table and a stack of printed documents at his elbow. "I went through the HOA's banking records, vendor invoices, and reimbursements," he said. "We've already identified over $70,000 in misappropriated funds, but this isn't just bad bookkeeping." He turned the laptop toward me. On the screen was a scanned invoice from a landscaping company. The name sounded familiar: Green Work Solutions. "I remember them," I said. "They used to charge us $500 a month to trim the entrance hedges." He nodded. According to this, they were being paid nearly double that. "Every month," I frowned. "They weren't even that good." That's because they didn't exist, my eyes narrowed. Come again, he pulled up a second file, an incorporation document filed with the state. Greenworks Solutions, LLC, registered to an address in Tucson, owner of record. Roger Ellingsworth, Karen's husband. I leaned back hard in the chair. You're telling me they created a fake company and funneled HOA money through it, he nodded, for over 6 years. That's when the trapdoor really fell open. Over the next 40 minutes, Thomas walked me through a shell game of fake vendors, cash reimbursements for security patrols, and donations to a community improvement fund that never existed. All of it tied to either Karen or Roger. You think the police know this yet? I asked. They do now, he said, closing the laptop. I've already submitted a full report to the Financial Crimes Unit, but I thought you deserved to know before it hits the courtroom. By the time I got home, the story had already broken. Channel 7 ran a segment that evening showing images of checks signed by Karen, ghost invoices, and a breakdown of the fake companies. There were 4 of them in total, all tied to either Roger or one of his cousins. The anchor didn't mince words. Authorities say this amounts to felony embezzlement and organized fraud. Combined penalties could exceed 20 years in state prison. The next morning, federal agents raided the Ellingsworth house. I watched from across the street, arms crossed, as they carried out box after box of files, electronics, and hard drives. Roger was led out in zip ties, his face pale and slack. Karen followed, saying nothing, her eyes fixed on the pavement like it owed her something. Nobody cheered. It was too raw for that. Later that week, I was called to the district attorney's office to go over my testimony. The lead prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Ada Nguyen, didn't waste time. This isn't just about property damage anymore, she said, sliding a thick folder across the table. Your case is the only one with physical evidence tying her to a criminal act before the financial crimes came to light. It establishes a pattern of behavior: intimidation, coercion, retaliation. She tapped a page. You're not just a witness, you're the linchpin. I stared down at the folder. Inside were photos of my busted door, the tire iron from my porch, and stills from the backup camera footage I'd submitted. There was also a transcript of Karen's attempt to issue fake fines weeks after the city froze the HOA's authority. I'll testify, I said. Whatever you need, she gave a nod. Good, because we're going for the maximum. As the trial approached, more neighbors came forward. One woman admitted she'd been threatened with foreclosure over a late payment that never existed. Another had been harassed into paying a fine for unauthorized paint tones, even though her color was the same as 3 other houses on the block. Each story added weight to the growing mountain of evidence. The courtroom was packed on the first day of the trial. Reporters sat shoulder to shoulder with furious residents. Karen's attorney looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. She sat stiffly beside him, hair flat and makeup sparse, her usual armor stripped away. When I took the stand, the room went silent. Ada led me through the events: the sign, the confrontation, the vandalism. Then she queued up the footage from my garage camera, playing the clip of Karen smashing my door in real time. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. When it ended, Ada turned to the jury. This is not the act of a community leader, she said. This is the act of a woman who believed she was untouchable. Karen's lawyer tried to suggest I'd provoked her. He even floated the idea that I'd tampered with the footage. But under cross-examination, he crumbled. Every time he pushed, Ada had documentation to shove back. The financial crimes team had built a case so tight it could have been vacuum sealed. By the end of the second week, the verdict was clear: guilty on all 15 counts. The judge didn't hold back during sentencing. Karen received 14 years for financial fraud, plus an additional 3 for vandalism and witness retaliation. Roger got 10. Their assets were seized to begin compensating victims, starting with restitution to the residents who'd been illegally fined. I didn't celebrate. Not really. There wasn't joy in watching someone fall that far, but there was relief and closure. The neighborhood moved forward without them. A group of us formed a volunteer committee not to replace the HOA, but to coordinate things like block parties, emergency response plans, and shared tools. No dues, no fines, no threats. Just neighbors helping neighbors. One Saturday, Devin and I were fixing a mailbox post for an elderly couple down the street when he wiped his hands on his jeans and looked up. "You ever think about running for city council?" I laughed. "I fix carburetors and chase off fake HOA presidents. That's enough politics for me," he grinned. "Yeah, but you get stuff done." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I looked around at the street, kids riding bikes, someone grilling, a woman planting herbs by her porch. It was quiet. Honest, free. "I'll think about it," I said. For once, that wasn't just something people said, because what started with a broken door had ended in something stronger than wood or glass. It ended in a neighborhood that remembered what it meant to stand up, to speak out, and to never ever let someone like Karen seize control again. 3 months after the trial, Oak Ridge Estates had finally settled into something resembling normalcy. No board meetings, no surprise letters. No more whispers about dues or fines. Just people living their lives without someone lurking behind ornamental boxwoods with a clipboard. I was back to full-time work at the shop, finishing a rebuild on a 67 GTO when I got an unexpected message from Emmeline. She wanted to meet. Said there was something I needed to see. Something that hadn't made it into the original prosecution files. I met her at the municipal records office, tucked behind a bland concrete building off Birch and 9th. She was waiting near a microfilm projector with a box labeled Oak Ridge Estates Planning and Zoning 2005-2008. "You're not going to like this," she said, as she handed me a thick manila folder. "But you deserve to know." Inside were land survey documents, permit applications, and a handwritten ledger on yellowing paper. The more I flipped through, the more my stomach started to turn. "This doesn't make sense," I said, pointing to a parcel map with red pen markings. "These lots don't exist anymore." "They did," she said, leaning over the projector. "Until around 16 years ago. That's when Karen, Roger, and a few others submitted a zoning variance under the name of a shell company. They claimed the land was unbuildable and requested a tax deferral. Then they sold it back to the HOA illegally at triple the value." I stared at the page. They sold land they pretended wasn't theirs, to themselves, and billed it to the community fund, she said, which, as we now know, wasn't even legitimate. This wasn't just embezzlement. This was organized land fraud. And based on the dates, it had been going on since long before I moved in. I ran a hand over my jaw. Why didn't this come up in the investigation? It was buried under a different shell company. The financial crimes unit focused on the recent theft. But this predates everything. I looked back at the documents. The names of the other signatories: Martin Webb, a woman named Dana Hollister, and one I hadn't seen before, Charles Neely. "Who's Neely?" Emmeline pulled out her phone and typed for a moment. Then she turned the screen toward me. "Former city planner, retired 10 years ago. Rumor was he left after a quiet ethics complaint." I took a breath and stepped back from the projector. "We need to take this higher." "I already did," she said. "The state attorney general's office is reviewing it now." That evening, I got a call from a detective named Salazar. He worked with the state's public integrity unit and had been assigned to the case. He asked if I could walk him through everything I knew from the sign in my yard to the trial, and now this new revelation. We met the next morning at the county courthouse in a quiet conference room. He had the kind of stare that made you feel like you were under oath, even when you weren't. "We believe Karen's group used the HOA as a laundering mechanism," he said. "Not just for dues, but for real estate manipulation. They declared land useless, transferred it under the table, then sold it back to the HOA at inflated rates. That money was then funneled through fake contractors and vendors." I leaned forward. "So all those landscaping and security services were probably just smokescreens," he said. "We're tracking the flow now. Some of it leads out of state. One wire transfer went through a company registered in Nevada, another through a bank in Florida. This wasn't sloppy. It was built to avoid detection." "And it almost worked," I said. He nodded. "Until she kicked in your door." By the following week, 2 more arrests were made. Martin Webb was picked up outside a golf club in Mesa. Dana Hollister was found in Denver after attempting to withdraw $28,000 in cash from a frozen account. Charles Neely, now living in a retirement condo in Yuma, was subpoenaed and brought in for questioning. The charges ranged from wire fraud to racketeering. That's when things got national. News outlets picked up the story, spinning it as a cautionary tale of unchecked HOA power. But what they didn't capture was how deep the betrayal ran. This wasn't just about money, it was about trust. People had lived under this system for years, paying into something they thought was legal, never realizing they were being used to prop up someone else's personal empire. I went back to court one final time, this time not as a witness, but as a representative for the Oak Ridge community. I'd been asked to speak at the sentencing hearing for Karen's co-conspirators. The courtroom was quieter this time. No cameras, just a tired-looking judge, a row of attorneys, and a handful of residents who'd come seeking closure. I stood and faced the bench. For years, we were told this was about standards, about preserving the community. But it was never about that. It was about control, about manipulation, about stealing from people while making them feel like they owed you for it. That's not governance. That's exploitation. When I sat down, the judge gave a slow nod. Then he gave his ruling: Martin Webb, 9 years, Dana Hollister, 7 years plus restitution, Charles Neely, 5 years probation and a lifetime ban from holding any public or fiduciary position. Outside the courthouse, I ran into Devin. He held out a folded piece of paper. "We're rebuilding the neighborhood council," he said. "Volunteers only, no voting power, just people willing to help. We'd like you to chair it." I shook my head. "I'm not looking to run anything." "You wouldn't be," he said. "Just guiding. You've already done the hard part." I unfolded the paper. It was a list of names. Over 30 residents had signed on. I nodded once and tucked it into my jacket. That night, I stood on my porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sun sink behind the rooftops. The light caught the new sign in my yard, hand painted again, but this time by my neighbor's kid. It didn't mention HOAs or reforms. It just said, "We take care of our own." A few houses down, someone was setting up folding tables in their driveway. Lights were strung across shrubs. Laughter drifted through the air. I could hear someone tuning a guitar. The block party was starting. I walked down the sidewalk, past homes that didn't match perfectly anymore. One had a mural of desert flowers. Another flew a pirate flag from its porch. A third had turned its front yard into a pollinator garden, bees buzzing lazily through the orange blossoms. No one asked permission. No one needed to. When I reached the end of the street, a group waved me over. Someone handed me a plate of ribs, someone else passed me a beer. Kids darted between lawn chairs, chasing bubbles and shouting nonsense. It was messy, loud, imperfect, and it was exactly right. Karen and her counterfeit kingdom were gone. The HOA was dead, but the neighborhood had finally come alive.